Welcome to Chapter 10 of Deltora Quest, Decisions. "So, Leaf," Barda mumbled, "are you not pleased with your companion?" Leaf could only stand gaping at him. "Do not tease him, Barda." Smiling, Leaf's mother moved to her son's side and gently touched his shoulder. "How could Leaf know who you are other than what you appear to be? Explain yourself." Barda pulled off the ragged cloak he wore, letting it fall to the floor at his feet. Underneath the cloak, his garments were rough but clean. He straightened his shoulders, pushed back his tousled hair from his face, tightened his jaw, and lifted his head. Suddenly, he looked completely different, tall, strong, and many years younger. "I also lived in the palace when your father and King Endin were young, Leaf," he said, in quite a different voice. "I was the grown son of their nursemaid, Min, but they did not know me, or I them. While they were at their lessons, I was already in training as a palace guard." But all my life you've lived outside the forge," Leaf stammered. Barda's face darkened. "I left the palace on the night my mother was killed. I knew I would suffer the same fate if I stayed. My guard's uniform helped me to trick my way through the gates, and I came here." "Why here?" Leaf swallowed. "Fate guided me, I believe, as it had guided Jared before me," Barda answered quietly. "It was deepest night. The cottage was in darkness. I hid myself in the forge and slept, and when at last I stirred many hours later, it was day, though it did not seem so. A terrible wind was howling. Only half awake, I stumbled outside and saw 4 strangers by the gate. I know now they were Jared and Anna, hurrying the king and queen away, but then I knew nothing." He glanced at Leaf's father. "Jared was rather startled to see a palace guard lurching towards him," he added dryly. "He greeted me with a blow that put me back to sleep for quite some time." Leaf shook his head, hardly able to believe this gentle father would strike anyone. "When I awoke again, I found Jared and Anna no longer feared me," Barda went on. "While I was unconscious, I had rambled aloud about my grief and fear, so they knew who I was, and they understood the danger that threatened me. They knew then, too, that I was a friend." "So we did," murmured Leaf's mother. She turned to Leaf. "We told Barda who our visitors had been. We asked for his help in seeking the lost gems of Deltora when the time came." Barda frowned grimly. "I agreed willingly. I had already decided I would do anything to overthrow the Shadow Lord and avenge my mother's death." It's incredible," Leaf sputtered. "All this time you—" Barda shrugged. "All this time I had been safe, hidden in my beggar's disguise. Jared and Anna gave me food and shelter and helped me play my part without too much suffering. In return, I have watched over you since you were 10 years old." "Watched over me?" Leaf gasped. "Oh, yes," drawled Barda. "After your father was injured, I said I would go alone on the quest for the gems when the time came. But Jared and Anna felt differently. They believed that you should be given the chance to fulfill your father's pledge." He glanced at Leaf's parents as he spoke, and they remained expressionless. But it was clear to Leaf that there had been many arguments on this subject in the past. Barda would plainly have preferred to travel alone. "He thinks I'll be a burden to him," Leaf thought angrily. But before he could say anything, Barda went on. "I agreed to the company on the condition that you'd be allowed to sharpen your wits and learn of a life by roaming free in the city. I believed this was so important, more important than your book learning and in your sword play, in fitting you for the time ahead. But of course you had to be protected from real harm without your knowledge." His lips twitched into a smile. "It has not been easy, young man, keeping you out of trouble. And this reminds me, you have my rope, I believe?" He held out his hand. Not daring to look at his parents, Leaf passed over the coil of rope he had thrown down in a corner. His face had grown hot as he remembered how he had prided himself on his many lucky escapes over the years and boasted to his friends. So they hadn't been a matter of luck after all, or skill. Barda had been his bodyguard all along. He looked down at the floor, his stomach churning with furious shame. "What a fool they must think me," he raged silently. This child had to be minded like a nurse. He must have laughed at me." But he became aware Barda was speaking again, and he forced himself to look up. "My beggar's rags have been useful in other ways," the man was saying, calmly fastening the rope to his belt. "Grey gods talk firmly to one another in front of me. Why should they care what a half-wit beggar hears?" "It is because of news Barda has gathered in the past year, Leaf, that we know it's time to make our move," Leaf's father added, eyeing his son's grim face anxiously. "Hunger for further conquest. The Shadow Lord has turned his eyes away from us to lands across the sea. Warships are being launched from our shore." There are still many gray guards in the city, but few now patrol the countryside, it seems, Barda added. They have left it to the bands of robbers and to the other horrors that run wild there. There have always been terrors and evil beings in Deltora, but once they were balanced by good. With the coming of the Shadow Lord, the balance ended. Evil has become much more powerful. A chill ran through Leif, quenching his anger, but Barda's eyes were upon him, and he would rather have died than show his fear. He snatched up the map. "Have you decided on our route?" he asked abruptly. His father seemed about to speak, but Barda answered first, pointing to a spot on the map with a blunt finger. "I believe we should move east, directly into the forests of silence." 3 gasps of shock sounded in the small room. Leif's father cleared his throat. "We had decided the forest should be your final ordeal, not your first, Barda," he said huskily. Barda shrugged. "I heard something today that changed my mind. The Grey Guards have always feared the forests, as we know, but now it seems no guard will even approach them because of the losses they have suffered. The roads are completely clear of guards, at least." Stiff with shock, Leif stared at the map with glazed eyes. To face the forests of silence, the place of childhood nightmare, at some time in the future was one thing. To face it so soon, in a matter of days, was another. "What think you, Leif?" he heard Barda say. His voice was casual, but Leif was sure the question was a test. He wet his lips, looked up from the map, meeting the tall man's gaze steadily. "Your plan seems a good one to me, Barda," he said. "With no guards to trouble us, we will make good time. And if we can find one gem quickly, it will give us good heart to go on." Barda's eye flickered. "I was right," thought Leif. "He thought I would refuse to go with him. He thought he'd be rid of me. Well, he was wrong." "So, Jared?" Barda asked gruffly. The blacksmith bowed his head. "It seems fate has taken a hand to alter my plans," he murmured. "I must bow to it. Do as you will. Our thoughts and our hopes go with you."